Chris Jones will be a Kansas City Chief in 2024 if...
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, folks. If is a big word, and we're going to run it down for you today on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day here on Locked On Chiefs. That means you're going to get us on YouTube. You're going to get us on all the audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, and the whole 9 yards. You can like, sub, and hit the bell right here, where you get extra content from our man, Matt Derrick from ChiefsDigest.com, who joins us on Wednesdays for you to get the inside scoop. We're brought to you today by FanDuel, and this episode, it lets you make every moment more. New users right now are getting $150 back in bonus bets after winning a $5 bet. That's $150 if you win a $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. We are getting started as we're going through our process. We're taking a pause here today, and we're going to talk Chris Jones, and a little bit more Chris Jones, because there is no personnel decision this offseason that is more pressing. It's got to be worked out. It's the biggest domino, and there are a lot of things to it. There was an exercising of an option last week that laid the groundwork for what's to come. We're going to get there. Check out Matt Derrick at ChiefsDigest.com and Chiefs Digest here on YouTube. You can find him there. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, as well as NFL33.com and RGR Football. All of those sources are available and out there on the web, so go check those out as well. Matt, it all starts and ends with, hey, you got that Lombardi, but next year's coming quick. The Combine starts next week. There's going to be draft class discussion that's already probably begun, although I needed to take a breath. But the number one thing in order to get cap space, understand what you have to do in that draft, especially for a defensive line class that's a little bit thin, I'll put it, is figure out your homegrown talent. And nobody's bigger than Chris Jones. We know that there was a delay in the whole 9 yards in the drama last year. They exercised an option on Friday. It was a 4 1/4 that he earned in incentives, correct? They exercise that, allows them to put the tag on should they feel the need to use it. This was not earth-shattering, right? This was pretty much an expectation as we walk through this offseason, correct?
Yeah, this option was really, it was much ado about nothing. It wasn't really news, but I think it was a slow news day, so some people had to make it into news. It was an option. Really, the Chiefs didn't have much of an option to pick up. And all of Chris's incentives that he had put into his contract back in September when he signed this 1 year deal were put into this option bonus. And it was designed that way from a cap friendly purpose. Chris Shea and Brant Tillis worked on this to get it done. But it basically meant that even though Chris earned the bonus during the season, technically, if you got a contract in September, all of those become likely to be earned, which means they would have counted against the 23 cap. Well, the Chiefs couldn't afford that. So they signed this, which meant that those bonuses didn't kick in until the option gets picked up, which, lo and behold, is after the season. So even though Chris earned them during 23 season, they weren't actually effective until Friday. And so once they then become real and earned, now Chris gets paid for them, but it's going to be in the 2024 cap number. So it was entirely a cap-friendly deal and didn't involve all the void years. There was nothing to it. The Chiefs had to literally pick it up. There wasn't an option to not pick it up. So word option was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that transaction. I know it was kind of reported that, the Chiefs had to do this in order to be able to franchise tag Chris Jones. Yeah, but they also didn't really have an option not to pick it up. So very much a procedural move. And now we move into the next phase.
And I think it comes back to this is going to impact what they pay out. Obviously, numbers affect 2024, where they have a little bit more cap space, and they're going to have to manage that. We'll talk about that coming up later in the show. But this, to me, feels like a long road to get to a destination, and you just packed. The sun just broke. You got the family in the car. You're just getting on the road. The weather's clear. Everything's good. You just got to check off a couple of boxes, get yourself some breakfast, fill up the tank. And that's what this was. Now it becomes the harder part as you climb through the mountains and you're trying to get over to the other side of the country maybe. It means that it's a good step forward, but not an influential one, right? This doesn't make us feel any better about a long-term extension for Chris Jones or anything like that, new contract, or the declination of what happened last summer, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that becomes what becomes problematic for the Chiefs in this time around. I mean, Brett Veach told us during the Super Bowl week that when it comes to Chris, I mean, they're basically picking up exactly where they left off last summer, and that was pretty far apart. So we will see what happens, but that what makes it really difficult to me is that the Chiefs can't, from a franchise tag standpoint, go through the standoff that they had with Chris last year. I mean, last year with Chris, they could afford his cap number because it was a little bit more reasonable. The franchise tag number is not going to be reasonable at all this year for Chris. So they won't really be in a spot where they can wait until July, August, and September to get something done with Chris, because as much as last year that really strangleholded them on being able to get some other things done, maybe signing a veteran receiver, maybe bringing in some depth at other positions. The stranglehold that the cap number for a franchise tag on Chris would have this year would be worse than it was a year ago. So that's one of the real logistical issues with Chris and the franchise tag this year.
Yeah, it seems like that is, hey, we got to get on this early. And it is now, as we record this February 20th, they have a couple of weeks before things have to start really getting cooking. Is there any reasonable chance that they can make headway here in reality before the combine?
Yeah, and I think there is. And one reason why is that, from what I was told, was that Chris became a lot more involved as far as the negotiations go late, and especially in September. I mean, after week one, when he was there and he watched the game, after that was really the first time that he and Brett Veach really talked, one-to-one about a contract. Normally it was with Chris's agents and everything, and he really let his agents handle the majority of the negotiations. And once Chris got more involved, I mean, something got done. So, I mean, all indications are that Chris is planning on taking a much more hands-on approach this offseason than he did a year ago. And if that's the case, then I think, what Chris wants to do is going to, have a much bigger factor. Last year, it seemed like the biggest factor in the negotiations was purely cost. It was getting the most money possible for Chris, the most money guaranteed, the longest term contract. If Chris is more involved, then, where he wants to play is, I think, going to be a much bigger factor. And if I'm Chris Jones, why don't I want to play in Kansas City? Why don't I want to stay someplace where I'm comfortable, where I'm popular? He's obviously popular in that locker room, in that organization, popular with the fan base. There's not a lot of places that he can go where I think he's going to be able to have that level of, relationship with the fans and the team. There's a lot of teams that he would go to where there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to win, and maybe not a whole lot more money. It could be more, but I don't think it's going to be a whole lot more. Maybe if he ended up in a place like Florida with, no income tax, as we know, and, closer to his home base in Miami, I mean, I could see that. But at the same time, there's teams that he could end up with where he's not going to win, and winning is not a lot of fun. Not winning is not a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun to be winning a bunch of games. So I think it's this time around, I think it's going to come down a little bit more to what Chris wants. And if Chris wants to stay in Kansas City, then I think that is much more likely to get done and happen this offseason than it did last year.
And what Chris wants is something that's a little bit more public than some people wanted. We're going to dig into that, the tag, and what this summer could look like on the backside of this here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet right now on FanDuel. That's $150 if your bet wins. Super straightforward and simple. Bet all your favorite NBA players with the teams that you're looking for, whether it's quick bets, same game parlays, exclusive props, and everything else under the sun. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. At FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the NFL. The cap is the cap is the cap, and then everyone says there is no cap. Well, we're going to dig through some of those iterations, and we'll have more with Chris Clark coming up later next week here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But in the meantime, folks, check out the Locked On Sports Today feed because it has 24/7 coverage of everything major going on in these games, not just the NFL, but the NBA and Major League Baseball, the whole 9 yards. You're definitely going to see us as, being the show that covers the reigning champs. That's a nice benefit for us. So you will see our faces. Please make sure you check that out. I think you guys are really going to dig it. It comes back to me, and as I just did a quick check during the break, we're sitting at a little under 24 million in cap space estimated by the major sites that do the estimation. They're able, shockingly, to pull over a rollover of 2.8. So every little bit helps, and I think that certainly goes into what you were talking about before. Is it being more than just coverage cost and getting money for dollars to go in the contract to Chris? Chris Jones is going to demand the attention first and foremost. I think both sides felt to me last year like they took it a little bit too lightly or a little bit too, hey, I'm just going to be where I'm at and whatever happens, happens. I think it has to be more proactive. And while I do feel that there are a number of things that have to change in order for that to happen, it starts with where you want to be, as you said. And before we even get into that, parades are fun because I think you see a little bit more true feeling than maybe some people want to let out there. There's a little snafu. Chris said some things about wanting to be back. I don't think his current agents, and I do refer to them as current folks, I don't think that they enjoyed that. That
dichotomy. Just because one of them tweeted out, cut him off, cut the microphone.
I mean, yeah, it might be saying something that, hey, you're not helping us. I do feel like that is part of this is like the emotion, the ability. He called run it back before it was a thing. Now they have back-to-back, and now the three-peat is something that's clearly on everyone's minds. The motivation of the player versus the motivation of the agents, I think, is still a dichotomy in this situation. We'll talk more about that later, but just the fact that it's out there in the open and Chris does want to come back, does that grease the wheels in any way? Because most cap sites have this as still a sub $28 million valuation per year for him, and that still is incongruous with what they seem to want.
Yeah, and that's where, Chris's cap number is most likely going to be based on what his contract was last year. Because remember, when they determine what the cap number is for a player, it can be the average of the top contracts of that position, but it also can't be any less than 20% of more of what the player made a year ago. So once Chris's, earnings with his bonus and everything like that he made for 2023 is added in, Joel Corey, who knows this better than just about anybody, is estimating that Chris's salary cap or franchise tag number would be like $32 million. That's well above what the defensive end number would be, defensive line number. That's even a little bit better than the linebacker number, which because a lot of some of the pass rushers who got a lot of deals done and edge rushers are technically outside linebackers than defensive ends. So those numbers are kind of screwy right now. It's actually why, franchise tagging Willie Gay, not really an option, because I think the cap number they're estimating for the linebackers would be like $22 million. Not really in the ballpark for Willie Gay, but L'Jarius Sneed's number is going to be, I think right now it's projected around like 18.8 for a cornerback. And remember too, that's the other issue for NFL teams is they've got estimates, but the franchise tag numbers aren't set until after free agency. The beginning of it is done. So it doesn't get set until April. And that's when teams then actually know what the tag number is. So if a couple of, players really go out there and reset the market at a couple of positions, it can go up. I don't think that's going to happen with Chris's number. I mean, I think that the 32 number is probably about what is set in stone. And that's what makes it really difficult, to squeeze Chris in short-term and long-term. I mean, if the Chiefs had to do that for a couple of weeks, maybe they could do it, but you'd really be talking about wanting to have an extension done with Chris or needing to have an extension done with him certainly by the end of March if you wanted to partake in free agency whatsoever at all. Yeah. But that makes it, the 18 number for L'Jarius Sneed's much more manageable. So that's why, now the risk is that, Chris is going to be on the free agent market in that case if he's not tagged, so he can sign with anybody starting on March 13th. That's the challenge, but I think that's where at least it seems like it's going at this point. And that's assuming that nothing gets done. I mean, I'm not ruling that out. That now that it seems like maybe there's a little bit motivation on both sides and nobody wants to kind of go through what they went through a year ago. And there's no doubt. I mean, if the Chiefs could get something done with Chris before that open negotiation window starts on the Monday before free agency, the price is probably going to be cheaper. But once he gets to talk to some other teams and get some numbers written down on a piece of paper, I feel like that would be the problem, is that then the Chiefs they lose a lot of leverage if you get to that date.
Yeah. So of the triangle that is this current situation of Chris feeling he wants to come back, and I do believe that was legitimate feeling, the team wanting to get him back and wanting to get the deal done before all the other factors can raise the numbers, they're clearly motivated. Yet it comes down to the agents being able to pull this off. And right now, I don't think it's a time where you can expect any change on that front. So the impetus really is before, say, the 6th, that's their window. Right now, it is prime time to try to get this negotiated and done. Is there anything that I'm missing, or should the gas be on the fire right now?
No, I mean, I think that's the best window for the Chiefs to get something done, and I think I forgot to add in the leap year when I told you earlier what I think the deadline is. So I think the Chiefs have the deadline for the franchise players the 5th this year. The February 29th just hoses me up, Ryan. So they've got that 15-day window. We're in the middle of it now. So technically the Chiefs could franchise tag at any time. And a decision on what they're going to do, I mean, if I had to pinpoint an exact time, I would say is probably Tuesday afternoon next week, because that will be just a few hours after Brett Veach and Andy Reid talk at the NFL Combine. And the Chiefs absolutely love dumping news on the franchise tag as soon as those guys get off stage. So I wouldn't be surprised at all whatsoever if that's what happens. But we should know, I mean, certainly in the next 8 to 14 days what the Chiefs are going to do in that spot. So a decision will come down pretty quickly. But that's the thing. If Chris isn't the guy that you franchise tag, then I do think that getting something done once again in, before really March 10th would be pretty critical, because I think after that, I think the leverage switches over to Chris's side.
I agree with you. And I think that's a critical point, but it's also a point where I think, from at least two perspectives, that's the opportunity for change, so you don't run into what happened last summer with this protracted lack of communication and just no real impetus to get it done, like you said, until Chris stepped in himself and took care of it. So what is the next step? What happens at that point? Well, we're going to evolve and go through that on the backside of this here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today feed. You guys are going to dig it. It's 20. Always see our hosts talking about the most important aspects of every league around this country and all the shows and teams that you love, including us here on this show. But the topic of the day is Chris Jones and what happens. And I am still of the mind that if you just can't get this done and you have to put the tag on, like you said, we won't have the final number till quite a bit down the road. Doesn't mean you can't negotiate. And I think if Chris Jones truly wants to be a member of this team going forward and the team truly wants to get it done, I still feel like the best foot forward is for Chris Jones to make the decision to change agents. I don't see this getting any better than what we saw last summer if his current agents are still involved. Am I overly dramatic about this?
No, I don't think you are. But at the same time, I think that, the player being in the room and being active in their own negotiations has a huge effect on things. So if Chris is going to be more actively involved and he is going to be in the room and wants to be on the calls with discussions with Brett Veach, then yeah, I think things can get done faster. And, and sometimes I give the teams and the agents and the general managers, benefit of the doubt here. Sometimes when we hear Brett Veach say, hey, no, haven't talked to the Katz brothers, or the Katz brothers haven't talked to Brett Veach and everything, doesn't mean that the Katz brothers weren't talking to maybe Chris Shea or Brant Tillis or somebody else. And, so maybe some of the negotiations were always, there are things being exchanged always along the way. But that doesn't mean that necessarily there was conversations between the Chiefs and Chris Jones. There was always a go-between and an intermediary. And I think that the fact that things got done when the intermediaries kind of peeled away and the principals got together. If the principals like Veach and Jones are able to get their heads together early, then yeah, I think a deal can get done. I think it can get done a lot sooner than later. But it's just a matter of, the player being proactive enough to say, hey, I want to be involved in my own negotiations. We've seen this in not just the NFL, but in other sports too. I mean, sometimes things don't get done, maybe the way the player wants, if the player isn't involved, that they just completely delegate it to their agents. Sometimes what they want doesn't get accomplished.
And that's really the impetus, and that's the concern that I have. Is it can't just start in one way and shift gears. It has to be consistent. And so it still feels that the best opportunity here for us to see something come together in a positive way for both this team and for Chris Jones is coming up. You're going to be at the NFL Combine. I'm going to be at the NFL Combine. Somewhere in that city during those few days, there will be meetings with Brett Veach, Chris Shea. I don't know about Clark Hunt, but I doubt Andy Reid's involved. But it will come down to the Katz brothers in their current situation trying to get it done. For me, this feels like the most optimal time is just go get a drink, sit down in a room, and figure it out. Because there's no subterfuge left when you know what the player wants and you know what the team needs and you know what the agents want to get in terms of their compensation, what they're looking for their overall compensation for the contract. It has to get done, and I feel like this might be something that's an opportunity to happen in Indiana that just can't happen in Kansas City.
Yeah, a lot of deals, a lot of breakthroughs happen at St. Elmo's and some of the other steak joints and the lobby of the hotel. I mean, there's no doubts. I mean, that some things can get done. A little bit less now because I don't know if they're bringing back the agent meetings this year. It used to be that the FLPA's agents group always had a meeting at the Combine, and that kind of went by the wayside during COVID. So I don't know if they're bringing that back yet, but that always made sure that all the agents were there. And so there was plenty of conversations and plenty of drinks and things could get done. So it seems like now, and we'll see if that ever comes back, but it seems like now that the Combine has become less productive in that sense, and that, it is really just more about the players. And even then now you're seeing it. I mean, I think there's even some of the coaches and GMs don't stay as long as they used to because, those conversations don't take place. Sometimes maybe they just come in for their steak dinner and to look at the players that they want to see and then get out of there and, leave it to the other guys in the organization to do the homework.
Well, and hey, we'll have all the number breakdowns on Rogue Analytics, folks, so make sure that you come check us out. That's what it comes down to, is getting the information, setting your goal, and then negotiating your way through it. I think Chris's unique situation, it would be, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it would be a surprise if they could work it all the way out before the tag has to be put on. But I think it is in the best interest for everyone in that situation to get it done before something changes and before, feelings come into it yet again. So just bottom line it for me, Matt. Do we see this tag get applied, or are you more optimistic than me that something can get done?
I mean, I think the tag gets applied, but I think it gets applied to L'Jarius Sneed. I think that's the one that gets done. I think with Chris, there's just too many loopholes to get through. But this applies to Chris and it applies to L'Jarius as well. The likelihood of something getting done, to me, depends a lot on the Chiefs and Clark Hunt specifically, and how motivated they are for a three-peat and getting things done that way. Because getting L'Jarius, getting Chris Jones, and remember, we've also just opened up the contract negotiation window and extension window for Creed Humphrey, Nick Bolton, Trey Smith. There are still a lot of other things to get done, and you got to retain some of your own free agents that you'd like to keep. Maybe a Drew Tranquil, a Mike Dana. I mean, you got to make a left tackle decision. There's a lot of areas that this team needs to still spend some money. And, we talk about, sometimes you hear about cap and cash, and that really deals with, the willingness of a team to spend well above the cap limit in cash in a given year when it comes to signing bonuses and all of this thing. If the Chiefs want to keep all these guys and they want to keep L'Jarius and they want to keep Chris and they want to get some of these other things done, this is going to be the year to Clark Hunt's going to have to pony up maybe $50 million above the cap, maybe even 75, pull a Philadelphia Eagles or a New Orleans Saints kind of checkbook out, and get things done. But you know what? If you want a three-peat, that might be what you have to do.
After back-to-back championships, I'm guessing that checkbook's pretty fat. So let's see what happens, folks. We're going to break it down. Again, next week, we'll have another checkpoint on Monday about where everything's at, not just with Chris, but as we're getting ready, because draft boards are being built right now. You can get my draft content over at NFL33.com, as well as all the post-combine athletic matrix numbers will be at rogueapc.com. As always, Matt, we'll have plenty to review after that point, won't we?
There you go. Yes, there's a lot of long hours going on in the front offices right now, finalizing those draft boards before the combine.
Yeah, and I'm about to go get weary on mine as well. Matt, thanks for being with us and letting us know where everything's at.
Always a blast, Ryan. Take care, everybody.
Have a good one, folks. Remember, Locked On Sports Today feed is your friend for all news on all sports. I will be back with you with Chris tomorrow as we continue our series. And then next week, we dig into not only the draft board as it's starting to finalize, but what's coming next, the NFL Combine. Thanks for being with us today, and we will definitely